So just to give you guys a recap, in the first video, all 3 of these reels completed 2 out of the 5 tests, with the REVO Premier and the Chronarch coming out with 1 win apiece. But now it's time to put these reels through their toughest tests, and those are with lures that are normally thrown with spinning gear, and those are, of course, your weightless 5-inch Senko, your 1/4 ounce square bill, and then your 1/8 ounce little finesse minnow. And we're going to start off with the Senko first. Okay, so I don't know if you guys paid any attention to the numbers at the end of each cast, but all 3 of these reels did an amazing job, with 1 reel just doing a phenomenal job. So let's get to it. Now, coming in 3rd place once again is going to be your REVO EXD with an average of 135.13 feet. Now, coming in 2nd place is going to be your REVO Premier, just barely beating out the REVO EXD with an average of 137.4 feet. So that's over a 45-yard average for the REVO Premier. But putting up an unbelievable performance was the Chronarch MGL. Now, this thing averaged 155.13 feet with the weightless Senko. So that's over a 50-yard average. And I really studied the casting footage, and I tried to listen for extra wind for the Chronarch, but it simply wasn't there. And the Chronarch hit a cast of 163 foot, which seemed like an anomaly to me at first, but it backed it up with 2 casts of 157 foot. So yeah, the Chronarch somehow just put up a dominating performance in this weightless Senko battle. So maybe these MGL reels are the ultimate weightless plastic reels. So up next is going to be the little 1/4 ounce square bill. Okay, so just to recap, the goal for the 1/4 ounce square bill is to average at least 100 foot per cast. And this time around it was way closer. But once again, coming in third place is going to be your REVO EXD with an average of 120.43 feet. Okay, so coming in second place, once again, is going to be your REVO Premier. And the REVO Premier averaged 123.65 feet, so about a yard average longer than the REVO EXD. Alright, so just barely beating out the Premier, once again, is going to be your SHIMANO Chronarch MGL with an average of 125.66 feet. And once again, I'm going to put up a little graphic of all the reels that have gone through this square bill test, and you can see where these reels stand. Alright, so up next is going to be the toughest test for any standard baitcaster, and that's going to be the true 1/8 ounce little finesse minnow. Okay, so this was actually the closest test yet, and just to remind you guys, the goal is to average at least 60 foot or 20 yards per cast with this true 1/8 ounce little minnow. Alright, so this time the order has been changed a little bit. Coming in third place is going to be the REVO Premier with an average of 75.25 feet, so at least a 25-yard average for the REVO Premier, and that's very doable for upper end bait finesse. So coming in second place is going to be your REVO EXD, and for this particular test I of course changed out the spool to the shallow spool that comes with the REVO EXD standard, and it averaged 76.3 feet. Alright, so once again, taking another win is the mighty Chronarch MGL, just barely beating out the EXD with an average of 76.6 feet. Now, it doesn't matter whether you win by inch or a mile, winning's winning. Okay, so let's start off with the third place REVO EXD first. Now, I just want to say that in hindsight, I probably should have used this shallow spool for the Senko as well as the 1/4 ounce square bill test, and that totally could have switched up the order of things, but you know, hindsight is 20/20, and what I'll probably do is rerun this EXD through those tests alongside some other reels that happen to be going through the test as well. But the thing that I don't like about the REVO EXD, and which I felt held it back, was its overpowered brake system. Now, it's not quite as strong as the air brake on DAIWA reels, but once again, you have 10 magnets here combined with a metal plate that sticks out farther, giving you more brake force, and somehow GARCIA figures this is going to give you longer casts. And it also needs a more sophisticated brake system. You know, this is definitely not a brake system I would associate with a $300 reel. Most brake systems and $300 reels are centrifugal, and that's because centrifugal brakes are definitely more dynamic casters. But if you're going to stick with a magnet system, you need to give it dynamic characteristics. Whether you spring load this metal plate here, or you spring load the magnets themselves, similar to DAIWA's MagForce and Shimano's FTB, that definitely would have helped, because on a lot of the lures, this reel definitely felt overbraked. At the end of the cast, it felt like a parachute went off and just stopped the reel short. So that's something to think about in the future if you are looking at getting this reel. So let's talk about the second place REVO Premier next. Now on paper, the REVO Premier should have won this whole battle, but I believe, just like the REVO EXD, the Premier was held back by its brakes. And let's go over my theories as to why. Now, the braking system on the Premier is very finicky, and it's actually very weak on the last half of the cast. That's where I ran into pretty much all the troubles with the Premier. And when you do blow the spool up on the Premier, it's pretty bad a lot of times. And in fact, I had to actually cut the line out and restring the Premier out on the field like 4 different times. And I never had to do that once for either of the other reels. Now, my theory as to why it's weak on the last half of the cast is this. Now, hopefully you guys can see, but on the end of each brake arm, there is this plastic shoe. And each shoe is shaped like an octagon, so you got your 8 flat sides, and then you have these points in between the sides. Now, the thing about these shoes is they're not fixed. They actually rotate on the arms pretty freely. And my theory is that when they are pressing up against this brake ring for more brake force, sometimes the flat side of the octagon shaped shoe could be rubbing up against the ring, giving you more brakes. And then sometimes the sharp pointed side could be rubbing up against the ring, giving you less brakes than the flat side. Now, with the SVS Infinity of Shimano, it's just one brake and it's shaped like a paddle that flares out from top to bottom. So when you're adjusting the external brake, bringing the SVS Infinity brake pipe closer, it's actually coming into contact with the wider portion of each brake shoe, giving you more brake. And that's why the external adjustment on the SVS Infinity is more effective. And then also, I don't believe that the brakes on the REVO are nearly as good as Shimano's when it comes to long casting. And that's because, if you can see, the brake arms are attached and pivot on the outer edge of the spool, and then they fly out from inwards to outwards, like so. Now with the Shimano, these brake arms are pivoting closer to the center of the spool, and then they fly out to in. And the best way I can describe that is that, have you ever seen an Olympic ice skater where they're twirling around, and then if they want to twirl even faster, they will tuck their arms and legs in closer to their body, and then when they want to slow down, they spread their arms and legs. And that's the same effect with these two reels. The Shimanos are more effective because I guess the weight is more towards the center of the spool versus the Premier. And one more thing about the Premier is that it doesn't really need to hold this much line. Now, I've taken line straight from the Chronarch, put it to the Premier, and there's quite a lot of room left for more line on the Premier. So it definitely doesn't need this much line. Okay, so the winner of the casting portion of this contest, of course, is going to be the Chronarch MGL, on the strength of winning 4 out of the 5 cast battles. Now, it wasn't a clearly dominating victory. A lot of these battles were pretty close, except for that Senko battle. But yeah, the Chronarch MGL takes the casting portion, and I guess I'm not really surprised because the Chronarch MGL is pretty much just a budget METANIUM, and I attribute its win to the superior braking system of the SPS Infinity, and it allows it to get those really long casts despite having a heavier spool than the REVOs. And I also think that the Chronarch MGL has better bearings. Now, what I'm going to do next, I'm going to put up a graphic of all the reels that have went through all 5 of the standardized tests, and you can see that all 3 reels are at the very top of the standings except for that CURADO 70. So basically that means all 3 reels have a very excellent casting range, you know, all the way from a finesse 1/8 ounce lure all the way to a 3/4 ounce lure. And all 3 reels also beat their much cheaper counterparts in these tests overall. So that's very good because as I said before, one of the requirements I have for a reel that costs $300 is that you have to be able to outperform your cheaper counterparts within the same brand. So now that the casting portion is all said and done, I'm going to go over the power, smoothness, refinement, and pitching ability of each reel. Now for the power and smoothness portion, I used a big double willow blade spinnerbait to test the cranking power and smoothness of each reel. Now the gear ratios for each reel goes like this. The Premier has a 7.3 to 1 ratio, the EXD has an 8.0 to 1 ratio, and the Chronarch MGL has the highest ratio here at 8.1 to 1. And as far as gear material goes, the REVO Premier has aluminum gears, while the Chronarch and the EXD both have brass gears. So when cranking the spinnerbait back to back to back with all 3 reels, as far as power goes, the Premier felt like it cranked the big spinnerbait a tad bit easier, and that's more than likely due to its lower gear ratio. Now between the Chronarch MGL and the EXD, I felt no difference in cranking power between the two. So basically there was no obvious difference in cranking power between all 3 reels, and that's because all 3 reels have their version of oversized main gears. Shimano calls theirs HEG gearing, while Abu Garcia calls theirs D2 gearing. Now when it comes to smoothness and refinement, it is a whole different story. And this is where the Chronarch MGL is at least 2 levels above both of these REVOs. And that's due to its micro gears, the X-Ship double bearing pinion support, and overall better tolerances. And that's more than likely due to just better engineering for Shimano over the REVOs. Now when it comes to the REVOs, they felt pretty much exactly the same, even though they both had different gear materials, so that's kind of strange. Now they are smooth reels, don't get me wrong, but you can definitely feel some gear mesh when cranking those 2 reels, and unfortunately they don't feel any noticeably smoother than lower priced REVOs like the REVO STX or the REVO X even. Now Abu Garcia definitely needs to implement some kind of a pinion support like LEWS did with their newest reels. So when it came to pitching, I felt that all 3 reels are excellent at pitching with very little effort. Now the jig that I was using was about 3/8 of an ounce, and there was no trailer, and I estimate each reel could pitch this jig at least 40 to 45 feet while keeping a relatively low trajectory. Now one thing I did want to mention was the REVO EXD. For this pitching footage, I was using the EXD's shallow spool, but even with the shallow spool, the REVO EXD seemed to require a higher trajectory pitch to match the distance of the Premier and the Chronarch. Now I feel that it's down to its magnetic brakes, but either way, all three reels are very capable at pitching, and I feel that all three reels should be able to handle pitching down to 1/4 of an ounce with no problem, or maybe even slightly lower. So when it's all said and done, the winner of this $300 Baitcaster shootout is the Chronarch MGL. Now all three reels are pretty close in casting and pitching for the most part, but when it came down to everything else, the Chronarch is at least a level or two above the Abu Garcias. Now the brakes on the Chronarch seem to allow slightly longer casts over a wide range of lure weights, but at the same time, the spool is still very controlled. And add the fact that the Chronarch is definitely smoother and more refined than the REVOs, even though it's made of carbon, that pretty much seals the deal and the win for the Chronarch MGL. Now basically it all boils down to Shimano's design and engineering. Now since Abu Garcia has the Korean Doyo factory making the REVO lineup, they are kind of at the mercy of that Korean factory's ultimate capabilities. Now the Koreans have surpassed the Japanese at a few things like flat screen TVs and smartphones, but when it comes to things like cars and especially fishing tackle, they are still a step or two behind in design and engineering, in my opinion. And honestly, I don't think any of the other $300 reels that were not in this contest could have changed this outcome. Alright guys, there's the $300 Baitcaster shootout for 2020. I hope you enjoyed and found it informative, and thanks a lot.